This is the Open University.
It's over. It's over as a snobby hipster way to talk about how things have lost their currency. And it's kind of over to make records about COVID-19 when the Rolling Stones have done one about how the world has turned into a ghost town. Yeah, old men doing kind of remakes of the Specials hit about ghost towns. I don't know. No, I'm pretending to be. I'm not really that snobby. But it is kind of over. I think it's my album about COVID-19 is over. I feel like the energy has flagged and I don't really have anything more to say about the particular crisis. I'm just, like everybody else, sick of lockdown and keen to get out into the sunshine, which is beautiful. It's been one of the most beautiful springs ever here in Berlin. And I just want to go out and kind of act as if things were normal, although I know they're not. It's strange, the city really has... Because there has been a tentative lifting of some of the restrictions on small shops being shut and all the rest of it. So it does feel pretty normal now. I was out yesterday, I bought this jacket in Humana down at the Karl Marx Strasse. Went to my usual Indian grocery to get my usual PG tips and masala chai. I went to... the only place that was shut that I normally would go to on that routine was... the coffee shop I go to, the Barn Cafe. I also like to go to Arabica, which is the Japanese chain which opened a branch in Berlin. Unfortunately, that's closed down permanently now in Kreuzberg. It closed before the COVID thing hit. They just weren't getting enough customers in there. That was really my favourite coffee place to go. But I did manage to browse in old antiquarian bookshops and things yesterday, my usual haunts around the Weserstrasse. And I got this, I just did, you might have seen the spoof I did for Niche. Got back into niche spoof graphic design. This is the original Hans Christoph Buch, Kritische Walde, Critical Woods. It's an essay, a selection of his essays, critical essays, on the Rowohlt publishing label. And the first essay in here is about James Bond. He classifies James Bond as trivial literature, über Trivialliteratur, and it's quite interesting. He's trying to, I don't know when this was written, in the 70s, I guess. He's trying to really fathom what is the popular appeal. 1972, this was published. He's trying to fathom what was the popular appeal of James Bond from a serious literature point of view, and I kind of like people trying to do that. I'm obviously, I didn't really see the Bond movies in the 70s, but I've been very, or in the 60s, I've been very marked, nevertheless, by this whole sort of spy theme ambience, especially by the music of John Barry. Of course, there's a connection between John Barry and Serge Gainsbourg in the form of Jane Birkin, who was married to John Barry and then left him to go and be married to Serge Gainsbourg. And you can hear that in some of the music of Serge Gainsbourg. You can hear he's kind of measuring himself up against John Barry. John Barry, an amazingly talented composer and, fantastic film theme music. So I keep returning to this kind of 60s film theme spy thriller music. I think it's a generational thing. When you're my age, you're late 50s, early 60s, whatever, you kind of think always about the 60s, the 1960s, and especially the way it's reflected in those film soundtracks, Morricone and John Barry. So the two songs I've yet to talk about from this album are September, which I skipped over last time, and the last song, Parasite. It might not be the last song, there might be more to come. I often do come up with a surprise, because I start to get depressed. I'm already feeling a bit sad that it's over, because when it's vocational for you to write songs, you really you come to life composing. And the idea of just doing that for 1 month per year, it's kind of sad when you come to the end of that month, and the amazing joy and thrill of creating something new, which you think is good, comes to an end for another year. It's a really sad moment. And I always think, well, I should just keep doing this all year, but you don't really have the stamina or the kind of conditions of absolute silence and isolation, although this might be the first year I do have those conditions. It looks like this lockdown is going on forever. But as I say, here in Berlin, there are people sitting by the canals, and Muji is even open at the moment. I could go in and buy pencil sharpeners at Muji, little CD players with cord buttons and all the rest of it. So, life does appear to be getting back to normal here, and that's because the Germans have been rather cautious and careful managing the crisis, but they're aware that there could be a second wave coming at any moment, and it could be as bad as or worse than the first wave. This is kind of what September was based on. September, I read a report late at night. I think I often wake up very dehydrated in the middle of the night. It seems to be the one lasting symptom of this condition, of the COVID thing that I had a month ago, is extremely dry throats at night. So I have to sleep with a bottle of cherry water by my bed. I woke up at 2 a.m. and I was reading Twitter, all the latest scientific developments on the COVID story, and got very alarmed by this story that there was a percentage of patients in South Korea were apparently reactivating after they'd apparently been cured. They were testing positive again, and there was a theory the South Korean scientists threw out there that this was the virus coming back to life after apparently being dead, a kind of zombie virus, if you will. As someone who'd recently recovered and was, blithely expecting antibodies to protect me, if not for a couple of years, then for life, this was terrifying, because I didn't want to have to keep going back through the same thing over and over every flu season. So that was shocking, and so I got the idea that it's not over till it's over became very strong, and of course "it's over," that phrase comes from, makes you think of the Roy Orbison song about relationships being over, whether it's over until it's over. But it was a kind of fatalistic idea that it's not over till it's over. And I went back to a song of mine which I really like, which is Year Zero, which was written, of course, about Brexit, comparing Brexit to, not just Brexit, but also Trump, comparing the year 2016 to a kind of Pol Pot Year Zero, a moment of awfulness where things were kind of starting again from a notional but really appalling new place. And so Year Zero, which unfortunately has had to be taken down, the video infringed somebody's copyright, so there's just the instrumental, the album version of the video up on YouTube. But I really liked the video as well. It was set in it was a Japanese Yakuza film. But yeah, I went back to the files. This is something I've done a couple of times. I think the first track on Terpsichore, for instance, is going back into the files of Erase from Bibliotech, and just remaking a track with some of the same elements. So if I really like the feel of a track, I do often go back and remake it. So this is what I did. I went and found the files for Year Zero and kind of made a song at the same tempo with some of the same percussion elements, which turned into September. And but it's a little more melodic in the vocal line than Year Zero. So it was a song about Brexit divisiveness, and it had that Morricone Italian feeling. It was based on samples from old vinyl 45s which I'd bought in the record shops in Osaka. Year Zero. And so I just had that. I built something new around that Morricone-ish kind of I don't know even what you call that ballad style, but it's got a bass line and drum pattern which really locks together. It's dum on the bass, dum dum dum, and then you've got room for the snare, pa, dum dum dum, pa. And it chugs along, but it has a certain fatalism which I really like, and so really just the idea of just when you think that it's the end, it all begins again. So, we're really not at the end. This was very much the feeling, and it will probably continue to be the feeling as we have these sort of, this flux of hope replaced by despair, replaced by more hope. Each time there seems to be a new scientific breakthrough, and then it seems to dissolve. And, the idea of inoculations is now kind of currently being dissolved. The idea that there'll be a quick fix in terms of injections doesn't seem to be so easy, because there's never been an injection effective against the common cold or against these flus, coronavirus anyway, flus. So that's kind of what it's about. And when I made the video, I put on a silly straw hat, and sort of mimed it, and then dropped myself behind the horizon like some kind of Goya monster in the disasters of war. You know, this huge monster, kind of what this pandemic is. It's a monster looming on all our horizons. It's huge, too huge for us to fight, but also too tiny for us to see. So I kind of had fun with the video, and this image, which I'm seeing a lot on Twitter, a lot of people talking about the light at the end of the tunnel, but is it actually an oncoming train? So it's sort of a cliche in the same way that in the Year Zero song, all these lines about the emperor is naked. This was the rhetoric that was coming up below the line in newspaper articles about Brexit or about Trump, or, you know, this idea of the new oligarchy being a kind of imperial nakedness. But I find these cliches instructive. I kind of like the way people think in this sort of imagery. At any given point, people are all thinking about the same metaphors and things. And the feature, the main sort of musical feature of the song is this chord where it goes, it's not over till it's, oh, and then there's this unexpected chord where the sax is kind of growling. I could tell you where the sax sample came from, but then I'd have to kill you, Mr. Bond. So I won't tell you, but yeah, might have been a sax tutorial on how to growl your notes, that kind of thing. That's where I tend to purloin my sax samples from, and then I sort of pitch change them and copy paste them, and they always give this 1950s kind of atmosphere, those sax samples. So I've got this guy growling on the unexpected chord there, and it seems as if you might have a key change and there might be an escape into a new world, a new life, but there isn't. The frustrating thing is it just goes back into the fatalistic chord sequence again. So a lot of people liked this song a lot and said it was one of the album's best. So I'm always happy to have these comments. You know, somebody said, how can you stand that? It must be as annoying as it was for David Bowie to have to sign autographs every time he went in and out of a building, when you have people constantly telling you this is your best track on the album for each new track. No, absolutely not. I love it because it's any artist has to love when people are getting into the same things that you're into. It's very different from just signing an autograph for autograph hunters or posing for a photograph. These things are inessential, but the really essential, the core thing, is to make a piece of art that really connects and really talks to people. Of course you love that. Of course you love positive comments. I'm very lucky. I preach to the choir, which means I get very, very few negative comments. And in terms of the thumbs down under the videos, there's one, there might be two, three at the absolute outer limit. People always seem to be very positive and give lots of thumbs up. I think you tend to respond more to negative comments just because you think, how can this person not see the brilliance of this piece of art? You know, it does kind of engage you a bit more, and you tend to just let the positive ones flow by. But of course, I don't take them for granted. I got a very nice positive review of Niche in the Publishers Weekly, only the second review that's appeared so far because the book's still just in preview form, pre-publication form. It doesn't come out till July. But Publishers Weekly said this is that rare showbiz memoir that's both entertaining and a literary triumph. So that really chuffed me. Of course, I love to get positive feedback and positive reviews like that. But the other song, the only other song I can talk about today, I don't have four today for you, is Parasite, which is the last one I recorded and probably the last one on the album. I've sequenced it. I've got a sort of, my YouTube playlist is in a kind of sequence of how the album will probably flow best, and it starts with, of course, with Oblivion, then goes on to Working From Home, and so on and so on. So I found a lot of the tracks were kind of big and plodding. They're longer than I usually go. They're usually about 5 minutes long. Usually the last album, most of the songs are about 3 minutes. You know, they're really concise and punchy. These ones are much more statuesque and stately, and so it's a little bit of a sequencing headache, thinking of how to make that not monotonous in some way, but I think I've managed it fairly well, and there are comical as much as you can be comical in this situation. There are interludes like the Tom Lehrer song, and so Parasite, this happened, I dusted down an old instrument, which is my Korg Mono Poly, and it's my favourite synth, but I haven't used it on a record since 2010. It's been in storage gathering dust, and for some reason I didn't, because there are so many virtual synths now, and it's so easy just to plug in an iPad and get synth sounds that you might have in mind. from GarageBand on the iPad. But I thought, well, no, because the nice thing about the Korg monopoly is just how wonky it is and how it tries to be a polyphonic synth. I think it's from the I think it's from 1982, that synth. And it's using these rather dubious ways to get full polyphony. So when you play a 4-note chord, it's kind of using different filters, and it's really at the outer limits of its capability, giving you a 4-note chord. That's why it's called a monopoly, because it's a monophonic synth that can just about do polyphony in a wheezy and imprecise way. So you really get some eccentric sounds with it, and I love that. So I went through playing it. It took me a long time because it was in a really bad condition. There was lots of static on the switches, and I had to really turn every single knob on that fascia to get any kind of usable sound. But then I got a sound that I really liked and made a chord sequence, and it was Bondian. At that point, it already started sounding a bit John Barry-esque. But because it's on a synth that John Barry wouldn't really have used, it sounded more like Broadcast or something like that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Broadcast, and actually, if you look at the singer from Broadcast, died of SARS-2. She died of swine fever while on tour in Australia. Isn't that amazing? That you have this spooky, atmospheric, film soundtracky band, one of the best bands of this century, the early part of this century, and then the singer dies of something very similar to COVID-19. Really tragic and deeply spooky. So it does, to me it sounds a little bit like some people were saying online that it sounded like Stars Forever, that kind of period of my production, probably because I was really into analog synths at that time as well. So a lot of Stars Forever is played on the Korg monopoly, which I bought in London in the mid-90s and had retrofitted for MIDI, and used a lot on that album. So it turned into a kind of Bond theme. I often have songs which sound a bit like Bond themes. It's become almost a cliche of what I do. There always has to be one track on each album that sounds a bit like it could be a Bond theme. Goodbye Mr. Quinn, for instance, from the last album, or the 2 albums ago, Endarkenment from the last album. And even, for instance, the Bowie cover, the way I covered Lady Grinning Soul, I did it as a kind of Bond theme and used the Bond graphics in the video. So that's something I enjoy doing, and it is a tribute to John Barry. It is generational, but also it's the idea that the virus, we need to personify our enemies. We personify evil and the things that threaten us, because it's comforting to do that, to see it as a somebody, a Bond villain living in a volcano on a tropical island, and planning to destroy the world. That's somehow reassuring to think of this little COVID virus as a Bond villain. So actually the Hans Christoph Buch essay on Bond as trivial literature, he's trying to really work out what it is. It's sex and it's sadism and it's high living, expensive living, all these elements in Ian Fleming's writing which have proven the enduring appeal of Bond. And there's even this sort of Bondian quality to the Queen's response. For instance, the Queen's speech in Britain where she said, "We'll meet again," citing the famous World War II song. So all these elements are absolutely core parts of the British identity. Bluebirds over the White Cliffs of Dover. Bluebirds, of course, featuring on David Bowie's final album. He might never see the Bluebirds again, and it means nothing to me. All that stuff. Sort of how British people face danger is they evoke World War II and they evoke James Bond. Just seems to be second nature to us. And of course, Edinburgh people, we have at least the thought that Sean Connery was an Edinburgh man, is an Edinburgh man. The James Bond, as written by Ian Fleming, was a Scot. He should always be played by Scottish actors. Sean Connery is the only actually Scottish actor who's played him, but he should always have a Scottish accent. That is James Bond. He is a Scot. I'm sorry. So, it's the famous scene, of course, in Goldfinger, 1964, where Bond is captured by Auric Goldfinger, named after the modernist architect Goldfinger, because Ian Fleming hated contemporary architecture and hated the Trellis Tower, which Goldfinger was building in Westbourne Grove. And so this architect slash villain Goldfinger has a contraption made with a laser. So there's a kind of involuntary vasectomy about to happen where Bond is about to get his genital area sliced in two by a laser. And he says, so I suppose, in his Edinburgh accent, so I suppose you expect me to talk. And Goldfinger says, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. And this really gets us into an interesting realm, which is the parasitical paradox. Let's call it the parasitical paradox. That when a parasite comes, and of course, let's clarify it, the coronavirus is not a parasite. What I had in this eye, I lost this eye to a parasite, which was a thing called a acanthamoeba. But metaphorically, coronavirus is parasitical because it doesn't quite live, and it can only reproduce itself by latching onto the mechanisms of your body, your DNA and RNA systems, and reproducing itself by fooling them into thinking that it's part of your body. So, as I understand it, it is kind of like a parasite. It cannot live without you living. So it's not got an interest in killing you. It does kill weaker hosts, but it doesn't. If it killed everybody, it would be the world's least successful parasite, virus, whatever. It needs to keep you alive. So this is really the interesting moment when in the Bond films where the villain kind of wants to kill Bond, but at the same time wants to get information from him or needs something from him, or simply has the narcissistic urge to explain his world domination plans to the agent before killing him. And this, of course, spins out the moment, gives Bond a chance to escape, to be, working on the knots of his rope, or and there is a kind of Scheherazade element to that. I've always been attracted to the image of Scheherazade. Scheherazade is the princess who tells stories to the king, and who the king kills everybody except her because she tells stories so cunningly that he needs to know the next night what happened. There's a cliffhanger ending at each time, and he needs to know what's going to happen. And so by spinning out this moment of let's talk before, you expect me to talk and then you expect me to die. Let's spin out that moment, and that way you can stay alive and you have just a little more chance. So in a way, that's another thing, that it's not over till it's over. It's the positive side of it's not over till it's over. That if you can hold death at bay, which is all we're ever really doing since we are mortal creatures, hold it at bay by, intriguing, telling stories, entertaining, and using your cunning all the while, you can sort of indefinitely postpone the inevitable end. And I suppose the most famous cliffhanger ending, my favourite cliffhanger ending of any film, is in The Italian Job. I love The Italian Job. I saw it when I was 9 years old. It was super impressive to me. I was really into cars at that time. Now I hate cars, but I still love that film. Not so much for the car chases, but just for little incidental glimpses of British people discovering non-British locations. There's a fantastic moment when Benny Hill, who plays this character called Professor Peach, who's a kind of mastermind, a criminal mastermind who's into fat ladies, they stop in the Alps, just south of, I think it's Chamonix, is it? It's just inside the Italian border from France, and they stop and they're picking, Benny Hill is picking looking at flowers, and we have a view of Mont Blanc behind, spectacular white mountain looming just over the horizon. And there's this beautiful music, Quincy Jones music, and there's this line Benny Hill says, "What a pity that people can't be as beautiful as flowers." And I was thinking, just that line in itself and just that atmosphere, I could make a whole song based on that, and referencing Matt Monro and At Times Like These, which is the title song. Just that idea of a kind of glamorous, languorous, exotic Italian feeling suddenly being encountered like a waft of strangeness, a waft of something alluring and strange by British people as they travel down south. As northern people with the Sehnsucht, as the Germans call it, the longing for elsewhere, the longing for the south. This is kind of the time of year when I get my own Sehnsucht. I start longing for the south and for Italy, for Venice, for the Biennale. Of course, this year, none of that's happening. All the festivals have been cancelled and postponed. The only festival that actually went ahead because it was happening early enough in the year. It was Angoulême. Angoulême is the great manga festival that the French have in Angoulême. And actually, there was a special exhibition bringing us full circle about Tsunge. I used Tsunge's imagery in the video for Parasite. So what you get is some scenes from his 1968 manga, which is called The Man Without Talent. No, not The Man Without Talent. Sorry, Screw Style. It's called. And Tsunge, he was sort of a hack manga artist working for Garo magazine, just doing manga for money, essentially, in the 60s. But then he started getting more sort of eccentric, and he suffered from depression and from a need to self-isolate, appropriately enough. And so he made this very strange dream manga. He fell asleep one day on the roof of the building where he lived in Tokyo, and he had a dream about a boy who'd been bitten by a jellyfish as he waded ashore. And the boy starts looking for a doctor in the village, but there are nothing but ophthalmologists, hence all the blinking eye signs you see in the video, or gynecologists. He ends up having sex with the gynecologist. He's got this wound on his arm which the jellyfish bite has made. He needs it to be urgently sealed up, you know. So the gynecologist he has sex with eventually manages to do this with a kind of safety valve and a spanner. She puts a kind of ad hoc vice on the wound and keeps it closed. And I suppose Corona is like the jellyfish. We all have this bite and we're all looking for sort of medical attention at a time when we can't find it. It seems like a very appropriate imagery, a dream imagery nevertheless, but you know, that is kind of us. We are looking for a kind of medical assistance we can't find. We find all the wrong kinds. So yeah, and the paradox is that the parasite fails if it kills you. You have to be wounded but not killed. So it's kind of like capitalism, which requires us to be in servitude to it but not killed by it. So again, this is something we're trying to regulate right now with the system. You know, how do we not kill the system but keep the system alive and keep it from killing us, and you know, sort of keep the toxicity just low enough to keep us alive. And it's all a bit of a juggle, but it's a very interesting juggle. We live in interesting times, and I hope I make at least one more track, but I'm not entirely sure. I think it may be over. It's over. Thank you for watching.
Open University. TV Club. Our next program this morning begins in